Hello and welcome to China Insider. I'm David Zhang. Whether it's sending pro-CCP actor Donnie Yen to the Oscars or try to broker peace between Ukraine and Russia, or telling the world COVID-19 did not originate from Wuhan, the Chinese Communist Party's top priority is to win over discourse power.
Whoever frames the narrative dominates the narrative. So Chinese are focused on what they call gaining greater and greater discourse power.
That's Rear Admiral and Head of Naval Intelligence Mike Studman delivering a chilling address on the threat posed by the CCP. But what exactly is discourse power, and why does the Chinese Communist Party want it? Discourse power is the idea of making words matter. The words reflect a nation's total strength and their ability to project influence through ideology, economy, military, and principles. In short, it's the permeation of ideological influence combined with raw power.
The Chinese believe whoever rules the word rules the world. To name a thing, to be able to be the one to define it, right? That's the objective there that leads to an ability to have influence.
America, since the end of World War II, has held the right to speak, aka discourse power. It's simple. Their words matter because they held both the top economic and military power. Now, the Chinese Communist Party views the US as its top enemy, and since the CCP fundamentally opposes the ideology of the West, they wish to defeat the US. And to do so, they have to win the discourse.
China sees the United States as the #1 enemy and is not afraid of calling us out as such domestically in all its channels.
Discourse power is the central focus of validating the CCP's rise to power. In their words, it's the east wind, or the rising east, that can finally topple the falling west, when discourse power is truly on their side.
And the reason is because when they took a look at Tiananmen in 1989, they said that can never happen again. The attractive power of democracy and freedom to the Chinese was an existential threat to the CCP.
Chinese leader Xi Jinping talks about the century of change. Now, you have to understand, the Chinese Communist Party is an opportunist regime. Since 1949, they have observed for opportunities to topple the West. And their first attempt was in 1950, an attempt to use the Korean War to overpower the United States by sending millions of so-called volunteer soldiers to aid the North regime. And that attempt, of course, largely failed as the war came to a ceasefire, and it did not actually affect the United States' position in the world. In the 1990s, the CCP leadership resorted to using the opportunity to grow China's economic power, waiting for a time to strike, what Deng Xiaoping called hide your intentions and bide your time. Now, in 2008, Chinese leadership concluded the following. America's war on terror, combined with the financial crisis, created 10 golden years and a pivotal moment for the Chinese Communist Party. The West is in decline, and the east wind is rising. It was since that moment they concluded that the war against America can advance to the next stage. Now Xi Jinping has been waiting for an opportunity to strike. His last one came during the pandemic. Now, when the world was drowning in the pain due to the virus coming from Wuhan, China was slowly trying to recover its position and boosting its national power. In his latest speeches, Xi Jinping replaced a 24-character strategy set by the former leader Deng Xiaoping back in the 90s, with the last 12 characters now reflecting the very thing that we just talked about, an opportunity to strike. He says, wait for a moment to act. Xi Jinping's words signal opportunities that come once in a century, a chance to grab discourse power. So far, every time the CCP has tried to grab the discourse power from the West and America, it has failed. But this has not stopped the regime from continuing to try. In the eyes of the CCP leadership, China has the potential to surpass the US in both economic and military progress. There's a key difference too: government.
We are the #1 enemy, we are characterized as such, and most Chinese fully believe that in their minds. So they intend to displace the US system because frankly they think that if they lead the world community, that there'll be a more stable system and it's safer for authoritarian governments. And that's the intent ultimately. When you talk about safety for authoritarian governments, it's safety for the CCP.
Now, I will assume that nobody watching this wants to live in a communist country ruled by a brutal dictator, nor would anyone wish to give up the rights that they grew up with. such as the freedom of speech, the right to gather, or the right to own a gun, or the right to vote. But that is actually precisely what the CCP leadership views as the weakness or the shortcomings of the democratic process. Strange, isn't it? Whether it's a republic such as the United States or democratic nations of Europe, the idea that people vote for their leadership and choices are given every 4 to 5 years or even 8 years indicates instability in power. To the CCP, there's no long-term political uniformity. They think that raw political strength of a leader cannot be preserved in these democratic processes. Objectively, there is some truth to this. If we examine the catastrophic effects of Stalin, Lenin, Mao, or today even Putin and Xi Jinping, we can see that the legacy of the predecessors on the successors, they actually impact the overall direction and development much greater in these communist and authoritarian nations than they do in the West. Yet at the same time, they enjoy long-term policy planning, even if it goes in the wrong direction. A prime example is the Mao Zedong era in China. From 1949 until his death in 1976, Mao's bloody regime in China was one filled with political campaigns and bloodshed. He drove the country into a chaotic state, but there was no opposition to the way that the country was moving. When Deng Xiaoping came into real power in 1978, shortly a few years after Mao died, his reform era didn't actually officially end until this year, when Xi Jinping finalized and centralized his power. So such long periods allows the communist system to grow in one general direction with no major shakeups for a very long time. Now, whether that's helpful for them to grow towards combating with the West, that's up to debate, but the point is they do have very long-term policy planning. And when they see us having a new leadership every 4 to 8 years, they do not see the will of the people like we do, but rather the weakness of political power. According to the Wall Street Journal, Xi Jinping will speak with Volodymyr Zelensky shortly after next week's meeting with Vladimir Putin. If the CCP leadership can successfully broker a ceasefire, it means that the words of Communist China weighs much more than that of the United States. To many countries, including in Europe, signals that China's words matter more than America's. That's the CCP using its relations with Russia to broker peace in the region, something that no other country can do. And this strikes as an opportunity to grab discourse power from the US. If a peace deal happens, it signals to the world that China did the impossible. And this is a once-in-a-century opportunity. Discourse matters because there's a saying in Chinese strategic planning and studies that war isn't fought with soldiers and horses, but with lies. Applying that today, we can see how exactly the Chinese Communist Party has circumvented the military to actually influence the American society. Oscars last night saw a pro-CCP movie star Donnie Yen coming out to speak and present British singer and songwriter David Byrne. More than 109,000 people on Change.org had signed to boycott his appearance, because he is a member of the CCP's consultant conference and also previously said of the Hong Kong protest, the freedom protest from 2019 to 2020 as riots, and then in 2017 he also joined Xi Jinping on stage to celebrate. Being a straight-up CCP official didn't stop the Oscars from inviting him to speak. Well, one reason could be that the new president of the Academy is Janet Yang, a member of the Committee of 100 and Asia Society. Now, these are pro-CCP organizations to act to help drive discourse away from the US to China. Hollywood, as overall the years that it's been involving China in the process, pushed more and more Chinese influence in America, which also helps to translate the shift of discourse. And TikTok by equal weight is also another tool by changing discourse in America because it helps to break down the trust in American systems and then trying to balance that by introducing the Chinese Communist Party as the righteous one. By influencing public perception on many political events, social events, they can generate a very pro-CCP environment in the United States. Now, to the same effect as maybe the Make Love Not War slogan back in the anti-war period, or in this case, China is not our enemies. Before America held the discourse power, and with it the rise of national overall power, the British Empire was the greatest power in the world. From one empire to another, we see that the rise and fall of and the transfer of power seems inevitable. Now, we discussed the CCP's opportunist approach because every time there is a problem in the United States, the CCP actively seeks to amplify that problem. What they're trying to do is to replace the United States. What about other countries? Well, the truth is, we understand the world as great powers competing. At the core of it are two powers at any given time, one good and usually one evil. Now, it was the Allies versus the Central Power in World War I, and then the Allies versus the Axis in World War II. And then, of course, it became the evil empire of the Soviets versus the West in the Cold War. Now it's the CCP versus America. Each power had a satellite or surrounding influence around all these other countries that are part of their circle. The US currently has Japan, the UK, and Australia as perhaps the most staunch allies. And China has Iran, Russia, and Pakistan. The rest of the world actually falls somewhere along the fence, like the 50% range. What they do is they try to observe carefully and watch what happens, where the balance is shifting. Is that towards China or back to the US? If the winds move in one direction, the rest of the world tends to fall in that direction. So to control discourse power means you get to influence and to make every other nation around the world, minus a few, heed to your call. And that's really important, because the one that commands discourse is the one that can influence how the entire world would function. If the decline of America is truly realized as claimed by the CCP, we can imagine that the most realistic result will be the takeover of communist China and the spread of communism. So I really doubt that we want to see that day come. The CCP talks about the last century as a century of humiliation. Since the Qing dynasty, China has suffered conquest at the hands of imperialism. They claim that it is the CCP that made China powerful again. But to return to the rightful state, the CCP must be even stronger, which means they must take over more. On Friday, Xi Jinping said that he would, quote, build the military into a great wall of steel that effectively safeguards national sovereignty, security, and development interests. Piloting a narrative on making China great works really well to garner domestic support, and it legitimizes China under the CCP. Propagandizing Chinese history and making it seem like the Chinese Communist Party is the real solution really helps to legitimize their claim to power. Now, who is to say a democratic process, China without communism, couldn't have done better? Well, actually, at the expense of just resources rather than 100 plus million murdered under the CCP, will probably yield a much better result. What the CCP, though, often tells us is that the Chinese people should be thankful that the CCP is in power, and that without the party, there will be no new China. But that's not really the case. That's just speculating on the fact that the Chinese population somehow could not do better without the CCP. Now, it's also disgraceful because it is not the CCP that made China great. It's actually the people. Just as it's not the US government that makes America great or prosperous, it's the American people. A regime that talks as if it is more important than the people cannot truly be strong, and I think they will never achieve discourse control. But it hasn't stopped them from trying. That's it today for this episode, the topic basically on why China seeks to control discourse power. This is China Insider. I hope you enjoy the content. If you do, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel and comment below what you think about our topic today. All right, I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.